right, good morning, everybody. My name is Brenda Bond, and I am a project consultant with the Nashville Technology Council, and I'd like to welcome you all with us. We have Miss Paige Boyd here that's going to be talking to us about networking for our next tech career or next career in general. Paige, I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Great, thank you. And thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone. It's good to be here. I always enjoy doing these kinds of conversations. Brenda, as you saw, we do have a couple slides that are really more to just set the stage. You know, I'd love it if this were a lot more conversational. So we'll do a lot of Q&A. Anything that I go through, if you have a question, either drop it in the chat, Brenda, I'll ask your help, maybe to help me watch it, or just remove we have a small enough group, I think you can just go off mute and just ask your question. So we'll start with a process. So let me step back. Let me tell you my background. So I was 13 years corporate HR, 10 years staffing, and then in the fall of 2017, I left my corporate role. I live in Nashville. I don't know if everybody else does, but my 13 years in corporate HR, 10 of that was at Asurion, 3 of that was at Nissan. And in the fall of 17, I left corporate life. Our oldest child was a senior in high school. So I decided to take the year off, spend that year with him. And once I got him off to school, I decided to launch my own business. And so the process that we're going to go through today is one that I have honed through that 23 years, if you will, in staffing and corporate HR, a lot of career coaching. You may have seen on the slide already, it's a simple process, but it is not an easy process. I use it, in my career coaching now that I work for myself, but we'll walk through it at a high level. And then we're just going to spend, whatever time you want to spend talking about networking. I've learned through the years that, for some people, networking can be harder than it really needs to be. And I try to simplify it and just give you a few tips around how to make it feel easier. Thanks, Brenda. Perfect timing. So I mentioned the process. There's 6 steps. I will go through these fairly high level and then pause in case you have questions or you want to talk more about anyone in particular. But if you are in the midst of a job search or considering starting one soon, I really encourage you to start at the top. Feel free to take a picture of this. There's nothing proprietary about this, but start at the top and don't proceed until you've kind of finished the step prior, because it does build and it does make a difference when you start talking to either people you're networking with or hiring managers and recruiters. So the first thing, if you are in the process of, pivoting your career or changing careers, or just, trying to move on to the next opportunity, it's really important to take some time to reflect back on your career up to this point and really think about what has worked well for me in my career, where have been my biggest challenges, where have been the times that I've received the most accolades or promotions or, pay increases, or I felt like I was doing my best work. Really try to get those things on paper, even if you're just bullet pointing it, and look for some themes. I think you will quickly find that there are some key themes in terms of where you are showing up and being the most impactful and doing your best work. And then, after you've gotten that on paper, think about, what do I want my future career to look like? Are there changes? Are there things in my career that I haven't enjoyed or that I'm not pleased with? And so I want to kind of, I want the future to look different. And where you can, really get that future career vision on paper. And this is the part that's not easy. We sometimes think we have it, in our mind's eye, so to speak. But when you start writing it out, you find that it's a little harder to articulate and put in words. And the reason that is so important is when you start talking to hiring managers and talking to recruiters, you don't want it to be the first time you're putting words to it. You want to have practiced it. You want to have thought intentionally about how you want to describe the job you're looking for, the future you're looking for, the environment you're looking for. Okay. So that's step 1. After you're really clear, and I'm going to use myself as an example. When I left corporate life, I really did not intend to start my own business. But after that year off, I came to appreciate the time that I had with my family and the flexibility that I had in terms of setting my schedule. And I just did not envision going back into that very, structured and kind of, whatever lands on your desk is is the work you have to do, that I had in my HR roles. I wanted more continued flexibility. And so I had to think about, like, how do I say that to people, as well as how do I construct that, right? How do I position my resume, my social media, any other professional profiles that you have? How do I adjust those to represent this future that I'm looking for? And so as an example, I had to really pull out the things that I had done in my past that demonstrated that I was going to be capable of running a business, of selling, my services. And that, it didn't take a ton of time, but it was work. I had to really think about adjusting all of my profiles. And so you want to do that before, if you can, before you start applying for roles, getting in front of, people for interviews or networking, because as they start to do their research, right, everybody's going to do their own due diligence to find out who they're talking about. You want those professional profiles, you want them to feel congruent to what you're saying, in your interviews. After you've done that, this concept of learning to tell your career story and talking about your brand. A lot of folks don't think in these terms, but when you're in front of either a hiring manager or someone that you're networking with, you want to be able to tell your story in 3 to 5 minutes tops. And so that requires sometimes, again, writing it out. What are the key points I want to highlight? How can I say what I need to say in a succinct, compelling way, something that gets people interested? And I'm sure you all know, that's not going to happen without some due diligence and some practice on the front end. And you want to be able to talk about it simply, similar to how I started when I said, hey, here's my background, 10 years staffing, 13 years corporate HR, took a year off, started my business, right? So you want to be able to get all of that out in 3 to 5 minutes. Any person you're networking with will typically kind of give you that amount of time. On the brand side, we all have a brand, whether we know it or not. There is a way in which people think of us and a brand that we've created. And so it's a good practice to think about what ours is, and does it line up with how we want to be seen in the future? If you're transitioning from some other career into tech, what are the things about who I was in the past that I need to start to augment to be seen more as a technology professional? And maybe, you're going through several certifications, or you're doing classes, you're doing apprenticeships, whatever those things are. How do I weave those into my personal brand and make those the part that I talk about in the future, so that that's what people see and remember? I'm going to pause here, actually. Any questions up to this point? No, all making sense? Okay. Step 4. So if you're, again, in the job search, one of the most common mistakes I see working with clients is they don't get really specific about their target companies. They really just apply, or anyone that's hiring, they're applying or trying to network with. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but in terms of being efficient, effective, figuring out, and I suggest people get a top 10. That doesn't mean that 11 through 20 you won't eventually apply to, but you really have to prioritize your time and use it in the most impactful way. So starting with my top 10 and figuring those out through your own research, what companies have a mission and vision that aligns with your values? What companies get you excited in terms of what they're trying to do in the world? Why are these your target companies? And being able to talk about that when you start networking. I've talked a lot about a networking plan. I cannot emphasize enough. This is an important step, specifically if you are, and I'm just going to say, not young in career, right? If you've been working for a period of time where, you know a lot of people maybe, or maybe you don't, but it can get overwhelming very quickly if you don't have a thoughtful plan that you can execute on when you start getting these interviews. It can be very easy to lose track of who do I need to follow up with if you don't have something in writing. And I encourage people, try to do 2 networking meetings every single week, whether that's a Zoom, a lunch, a coffee. If you can do 2 every week, before you know it, you've met 10 new people. And in those networking conversations, often they're referring you to other people. And so you've got to keep this in writing, or you will miss a follow-up, or you'll miss an opportunity that someone has made a connection, and that may be the one that leads to the perfect job, right? And then that last one is not surprising to anyone, but you'd be surprised how many people, and I've interviewed lots of people. So I led talent acquisition at both Asurion and Nissan for a number of years. You already heard me talk about my staffing. A decade in staffing, I have done a lot of interviews, and it is surprising how many folks show up without having done their due diligence about the company. What's going on with the company? What maybe is in the news about the company? What is the particular role that you are interviewing for? Being able to ask questions like, how does this role contribute to the business and the strategy of where this company is trying to go? Really thoughtful questions that signal to the interviewer, this candidate is different than the 3 other candidates I've talked to today. And this will also come from your own personal interest, right? And you want that to show up. You want to leave them with an impression of what makes you, you. Okay, I'll stop again before we move on. Any questions about the process? Okay. If you would move to the next slide, Brenda, please. And I think some of you may have seen this. I kind of think of networking very differently. And I want to try to make it super simple, which is when you think about, setting up a networking meeting, one of the most common obstacles, I guess I would say I hear from people is they feel like they are asking the other person to do something for them. And so it makes them feel uncomfortable to have to ask the person to make time for them, or ask the person, to help them. Or they show up and they talk all about themselves as the candidate. Here's what I need, here's what I'm looking for. And it really often doesn't resonate with the other person. And so my encouragement is start by just asking them to tell their story. Right. And so even when you're reaching out, your email could say something like, I heard about you from my friend so-and-so. I'm really interested in why you love working at whatever company. I'd love to hear your advice. What has worked well for you in terms of your career at so-and-so company? What lessons learned do you have? Just let them talk. And the more they talk, the more you learn, right? In terms of, is this going to be a good opportunity for me? Is this a good contact for me? I always encourage people, start with what you can do to help them. And I know you all have probably heard this before, so I hope it doesn't, sound preachy in any way. But when we're in the heat of the interview process, right? When we're feeling the pressure to either land something quickly, or we've got multiple interviews we're going on, emotionally, mentally, we can lose sight of some of the things that we all know when we don't have that pressure or we don't have that stress. Questions or comments? No? All right, well, gosh, this may be a quick call then. We'll go to the third slide. I chose to include this because I think it's more important now than ever. But in my business, part of what I do is organizational change. And, I'm a certified change expert and have done a lot of org change in the companies that I worked in. And one of the biggest reasons that those changes don't happen is because we don't attend to the people, the employees, right? The ones that actually have to make the change happen. And so it's really important during a career transition to recall or to spend time thinking about, how am I doing psychologically with the fact that I'm going through a big transition? And this book that you see on the left, it's called Managing Transitions. It was written in the early 90s by a psychologist named William Bridges. He offers up a model, which I think is simple and very easy to use. It's called the transition model you see on the right. And the gist of it is that all of us, whether it's we're getting married, we're getting divorced, we're moving, we're changing jobs, whatever the transition we're going through, we first need to go through saying goodbye or the ending to what once was. Either, maybe you've been laid off, maybe you've moved for a spouse, whatever it is, that past, there has to be some way, and it needs to be fairly, think of it as graduation is the end of high school years, right? Or a wedding is the end of single life, right? Career transition is the same way. And saying goodbye to that past role is important to do mentally. And then recognizing that we're all going to be in a state of what Bridges calls the neutral zone, but it's going to feel uncomfortable. It's where I've got one foot in the past and don't really know what the future looks like. And so it's kind of uncomfortable and, neutral zone, a time period that could be, 3 months, 6 months. It's different for everybody. And then the new beginnings is obviously when you start to see what your future is going to look like. Maybe you've done that future vision exercise I mentioned, and you at least have a picture in your mind of what you're trying to create. You may not have figured out how to do it yet, but at least you're starting to see hope for a better future. And so if this is something that you feel like, I'm probably going through this right now, I really encourage you to pick up William Bridges' book, where you could read, snippets of it online, and talk to somebody, get someone that can help you process, the emotions that you're going through your transition. I'm going to stop. That was the prepared material that I had for today. I hope that there will be some questions, but if not, that's okay too. What questions can I answer or thoughts do you have? Hi, Charles.
Hi, how are you? If you are interested in a lot of different things, how would you focus down on specifically an interview process or the networking process? Yeah. How would you focus down on something and kind of tailor your conversation to that?
It's a great question. I appreciate you asking it.
Okay.
Well, and I have a few clarifying questions just to make sure I answer you in a helpful way. When you say, when you're interested in, a lot of different things, is that different roles or different types of work or different,
all of the above. Yeah. All of the above. Yeah. I'm a weirdo. I don't focus very well. I focus easily, but then again, I focus on a lot of things, and I have a tendency to move from this to that and the other and cycle through things.
Right.
And so when you say who are you to me, I have a real problem with that.
So, okay, I appreciate you being vulnerable, because this speaks exactly to what I was talking about at that first step in the process. And I will say I've interviewed and networked with a lot of people that at the end of our coffee or lunch or interview, I really don't know how to help them because I feel like they're so all over the place that in the moment, nobody comes to mind that I could introduce them to, right? Or no specific type of role comes to mind because it isn't clear to me what it is that's going to make them happy, right? And so while it's a really hard thing to do, like you described, to be effective in the interview and networking process, that's the hard work, I encourage you to do. And so in terms of how, right? Start with that. I call it a career inventory, or you may think of it as just reflecting up to this point, right? What has gone really well for me? Where have I found myself, super challenged and in a way that's actually not good. It's not productive. It's not healthy for me mentally. I don't mean the type of discomfort that comes when we're growing. I mean, I just didn't know how to do the work, right? Or I just didn't even know how to get started, or I didn't like it. Those are the things to kind of go, okay, well, I probably don't want a lot of that in my life in the future. maybe I'm interested in it, but it didn't work well for me, right? And it does require us to make some choices in terms of what do we want to go after for the future. What I would say is it doesn't mean if you make a choice. So I made a choice to start a business. And one of the things that gave me the courage to do that was working with my own coach, who said, you know what, Paige, what's the worst thing that can happen if this doesn't work? And I said, I'd have to go back and get a corporate job again, right? Well, once I realized that if this failed, I had an alternative, one that I had done for 20 something years. So I knew that I could, right? That allowed me to say, okay, well, for now, I'm going to put this corporate, experience that I have, I'm going to put it on the back burner. It doesn't mean I won't come back to it. Doesn't mean I can't explore it again, if an interesting role comes along. But in terms of how I want to move forward and focusing my efforts, I'm going to put all my energy in starting this business. And so you may, I guess I'll ask even, are there a few things right now? You've got a couple of different things in your mind and you're not really sure. Maybe we could just talk about them.
At this point, yeah, I've been professionally in sales for a really long time.
Okay.
Sales and management and hospitality, and honestly, you go back and it gets wilder and more divergent.
Yeah.
I've been a roofer and a truck driver too. So I mean, it doesn't matter. If it can be done, it has been done. And I usually enjoy what I do. I mean, I'm the kind of person that I'm gonna have fun doing what I'm doing. Which makes me, usually a fairly effective salesperson.
Sure.
But by the same token, I want to be creative. I don't want my paycheck to be dependent on the mood of the client. I want my paycheck to be dependent on my output. That's what, I'm 50 and it's taken me a very long time to figure out that that's what I actually want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But having done that, and building up a lot of education in the background and trying to develop the things that go along with that, it also opens up. I mean, you think you're going to walk down a path, but then you realize that this path is divergent in so many different places.
Well, it's so funny that you say that, and I don't want to put you on the spot. So at any point you say, Paige, let's stop. But given what you just described, the questions that come up for me are, have you debated going into business for yourself?
I have done that.
Because what I hear you saying is, I have this body of work. I've been doing it for a while and I've been pretty good at it. And I want my future to be determined by my output, not by the other person's mood, right? And so the output could be, the way in which Charles does things, Charles's methodology, Charles's process, right? And that becomes something that you create and then you go sell it and get clients to let you come in and do it for them. So you're teaching them how to do what you've done. It's really sales and consulting in a lot of ways. So that's one option. The other thing that people, and I'm just going to use you as an example, since, you said, hey, I'm 50. And this is a very, I would say once we hit 40, for most people after that point, it is a constant ongoing, am I doing what I want to do with the rest of my life? Or am I at a point where life is short and maybe I want to do something different? So you are not alone in having those, things, those thoughts. You also, it's an opportunity where you probably are in a position where you maybe could take more risks than you were able to take, when you were younger in your career. Maybe you had a family, that you had to provide for, or didn't have any money that you could go out to, at least invest in starting a business. So your situation is very normal at that, kind of 40 and above. A lot of people go down the path of looking at franchises, and they say, I just want to run a business, but I don't know how to start it, right? And I don't know what business I would start. So they go down the path of exploring franchises, and that's the business that they run. They get the support from a franchise structure. That help?
A bit, yeah. I will say that I actually left my corporate job as well about 10 years ago, and yeah, and went into sales for myself and did that for, well, I'm still doing that kind of on the side, but very, very low key now. But I did that until I got to the point where I, made this decision. Then I went back to school. The transition for me has been one of, I mean, it's a holistic change. Okay, so the pipeline, the network that I had from before is very, very focused on that.
Yeah.
And it's an old and entrenched pipeline. They don't want to hear about Charles who wants to do application development. They want to know when Charles is going to be there to answer the question about where can I get this part, where can I get this configuration, how is this going to work for me? It's a different paradigm, and switching between those to build the new pipeline out has been a real challenge.
Yeah. Well, so here's what I would say. I appreciate you saying application development, because that gives me clarity of where you're trying to go, right? And I think that the fact that you went back to school, right, and that's the path you're on, you've made that decision, which is great, because now you're clear. And so my encouragement would be focusing your attention on, okay, so how do I go land that first job? And that would take me back to the target companies. Instead of even worrying about all these other things, I would say, okay, my goal, right, is to get my first job in one of the top 10 companies that I want to work in. And so once you get those 10 companies on paper, you guys, then go to your LinkedIn, if you use LinkedIn. If you don't, wherever you access your network. But I encourage people, search in your network that your first, second, and third connections, anybody I know that works at these companies today. And this is not HR people. It's not necessarily recruiters. I mean, it can be, but even if you know someone in product development or marketing or technology in a space that's, adjacent to where you're trying to go, the goal is just to start talking to people inside that company and telling them, hey, I'm looking for a role in application development. What advice would you give me as someone that's transitioning from a totally different career? So I don't really have a lot of experience per se, right? And the thing that you want out of that conversation, ideally, is that person gets so, they're clear about what you want. They see that you're committed. They see you've done the work to go back to school, and they're willing to advocate for you. And so they say, you know what? I really don't know maybe what is happening in that department right now, but I know the recruiter really well. Send me your resume. I'm happy to put in a good word for you. Recruiters, we hire referrals 9 times out of 10 over someone that we don't know, right? I mean, that the employee referrals are the absolute best source, because we know that that person is willing to put their own reputation on the line. And so it's rare that someone refers someone that they can't at least speak to, maybe their character or their background. They may never have worked with you before, but you leave an impression, from that lunch or that coffee.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And maybe even after our call today, if you were to sit down and go, okay, I got to have a goal of 2 a week. Paige said, we got to do 2 a week, right? How can I find 2 people for the next 4 weeks? So 8 people inside my target 10 companies. And don't worry too much about not knowing them that well. People come back all the time. They're like, well, I barely know them. That's okay. It can't hurt to just reach out and say, I'm in the process of networking for my next career opportunity. I found your name. We know each other fairly distantly, but through this person, like, would you be willing to get on the phone with me for 15 minutes? Maybe you don't even ask for a lot. But the goal is to just get started, and think of the networking as like a sales funnel, right? The more you put in the top. So if you've got, 8, you just need 1, the right one that comes out the bottom of the funnel.
How would you go about structuring that call?
Yeah, sure. So first, I'm just going to use that scenario. So we've met someone via LinkedIn. We have a common connection, but maybe we've never spoken before. And I've already told them I'm networking for my next opportunity. So they know that you're in search, right? I would, if you had a couple of roles that were interesting at that company, I'd be prepared to talk about, what those were. And I would start with the advice I gave earlier, which is, hey, thank you so much for making a few minutes. I know you're super busy. I'll try not to take much of your time. You know, as you saw from my email, I'm very interested in X company. What has been your experience? You know, before you get on that call, try to find out how long they've been there from their LinkedIn profile. You know, I see you've worked in these 3 or 4 different roles. Can you tell me, you know, what your experience has been, what you like about it, what keeps you there? Because all you're doing is trying to fact find. You're trying to learn, you know, and then, you know, since you know I'm interested in working at the same company, what advice do you have for me? You know, are there any people you think I would benefit from meeting? A lot of times people will go there naturally. They'll say, you know what, you need to meet so-and-so. But if they don't, you know, be prepared to say, you know, I recognize that networking is a big part of, you know, making your way into a new company. You know, do any people come to mind inside the company that you think it would be smart for me to meet with? And then they say maybe 2 or 3, and you say, you know, would you be comfortable making an introduction? Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But my experience has been, we've all been there. You know, everybody has had to change jobs. And so more often than not, people are really willing to be helpful, especially if you've started out with like just learning about them, you know, and thanking them for making time for you. Hope that helps.
It does.
Anybody else? Questions now that we've had a little bit of a discussion, or comments even from the process or networking in general? No? Okay, well, Brenda, unless you have, you know, anything else, that was the prepared material that I had wanted to cover today.
Fantastic. No, I think this was a great talk. Thank you so much, Paige. And I know we had a few people drop off and come in, but thank you everyone for joining today. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend and a great holiday season.
Yeah, for sure. Bye, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Bye, everybody.